to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
This is Dr. David Perrodin, and I want to thank you as we begin another journey into school and community safety. If you're looking for industrial safety expert, Appalachian State University professor Dr. Timothy Ludwig, please visit www.safety-doc.com. Again, that's Dr. Timothy Ludwig at www.safety-doc.com. Hi, everyone. This is David Perrodin, and welcome to Safety Doc Podcast number 60. Today, we talk about the 4 self-awareness archetypes and introspection's fatal flaw. For years, I have taught people how to work on self-reflection and introspection, key elements for very rushed leaders. But you know what? That is not all the way up the mountain. It's that point when you get above the clouds and you have that incredible view and it's like, whoa, it's like otherworldly. But you know what? You need to get all the way to the top of that mountain, all the way to the summit, right there at the top. And there's something there we're going to talk about today, which I haven't talked about before. So I'm going to get into introspection, talk about how to navigate that. And a lot of times we don't even do that very effectively. And then the step beyond that, it's going to make you much more thoughtful in your everyday activities, finding peace in what you do, finding strength in what you do, being a better leader, whether that be in your family, whether it be with groups at work, whatever, or just the finding peace and harmony within your own thoughts and contemplating everything that comes at us during the day. Oh my goodness, like how many posts on Twitter and social media and the regular media. Oh, it's outrageous. So let's give some thanks here. It's Groundhog's Day, which means we're thankful for groundhogs. But we are also thankful for the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California. The 405 Media with John Grant airing this show, 2 p.m. PST daily. The 405 Media out of Los Angeles. It is the League of Extraordinary Podcasters. Go in and listen to Aaron Clary and the Clary Podcast, Larry Roberts and Readily Random, and just so many more outstanding podcasters, so many outstanding shows on the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, the405media.com. I want to give a shout out to a new podcaster, Kat, with the Paranormal Hearts podcast. You can find it on Podbean, podbean.com. Type in Paranormal Hearts. It's a show that I'm also following, so you can locate it that way. Kat is interviewing people right now, setting up her interview schedule, which is filling up quickly about stories, paranormal and supernatural, and then drilling down deep into those stories. So it's going to be a really thought-provoking, fascinating show. It is right now. I mean, I think there's just a handful of episodes out, but I'm excited because these are the types of things, and I've said this before, and it was something I experienced with my interview when I had Jim Mallard on my show, and also when I was on his show. People who investigate the paranormal are very, very good at seeking empirical data and knowing how to set up and research a scene and do background information. And that translates extremely well into areas such as podcasting, and not only talking about, paranormal conspiracy and things like that, but also talking about very kind of unusual series of events. So really some fascinating stuff. But I do want you to check out that new show, Paranormal Hearts, with Kat as your host on Podbean. A thank you to Sprigeo, S-P-R-I-G-E-O. You can look in the background here if you're watching on YouTube, S-P-R-I-G-E-O, Sprigeo.com out of Santa Barbara, California, a sponsor of the Safety Doc Podcast. Sprigeo.com, the nation's leader in online bullying, harassment, discrimination, and threat reporting for schools. Sprigeo has taken it to the next level. I work with Sprigeo in a consultant capacity specific to the user interface. A massive attention focusing on making sure that students are able to interface with the system and just systems in general. Sprigeo is the leader in that, making sure that we're not producing things at a level that basically is not understood by kids or adults. And if you go in and sample, it's interesting. You go in and sample handbooks, you'll find a lot of content regarding bullying and harassment is written at a 12th grade level or beyond. So working diligently with Joe and the great folks at Sprigeo to create the most user-friendly universal design for learning interface that exists for reporting. So Sprigeo.com. If your school district is not using Sprigeo.com, ask why not? Check it out. Sprigeo.com. Thank you to Hector Solis and the Awareness Podcast. Awareness Podcast you can also find on Podbean, and the narratives that go along if you go and read about the investigative process that Hector has undergone with his interviews, most recently in the areas of grooming and sex trafficking, also bullying, school safety. But phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. It's removing the rhetoric. It's stripping the rhetoric away and getting to the heart of the matter, where he is interviewing people and getting the firsthand accounts of their experiences. So you need to check out the Awareness Podcast. Please, Awareness Podcast with Hector Solis. And guess what? Hector is going to be my guest on podcast number 61 here with the Safety Doc. Yeah, good friend Hector. He's coming back. We are doing a special on grooming practices, how to help parents and schools identify grooming practices, questions to ask students to cultivate a discussion, which might surface, I have concerns that student might be a victim or a recipient of grooming. Very fascinating fact that Hector shared with me. 1 out of 80 to 100 children who are groomed report that. So, it's 1 out of 80 to 100. So we're talking like, 1%, maybe 1.5%. So it just doesn't get reported, and for a number of reasons. And we're not looking for it right now in our reporting systems. It's not talked about frequently in schools. It's not talked about by parents. So, it's an uncomfortable topic. So we're going to get into that and say, here's some language that you can use, which is, not going to be offensive. And it's language to get into this very touchy topic. And then also, what happens if you do start to learn about some of these things? How can you intervene? And I'll leave that with saying, one of the stories Hector shared with me is that once this happens, where a child has become successfully groomed by somebody, it's very, very hard to reunite that child with their family. In some cases, impossible. So we are talking about something very, very significant. Again, that will be podcast 61, which we'll record in this upcoming week and will be released in approximately 1 week. That needs to be a listen, folks. That needs to be a listen to anybody out there who has kids, or anybody who works with kids or interfaces with kids, through the types of, work that they do or whatever, church groups, because there are going to be subtle things which Hector will talk about, and also that I'll talk about from my research. And we need to get this more to the forefront, because right now this is absolutely crazy. I believe, I saw something, a documentary where a police department put out like 5 or 6 profiles. They just a picture of a young person, and within an hour or 2 hours, they already had numerous hits or contacts, from people asking questions, which started to show like a grooming type pattern, the questions that were being asked. So, if you have kids and they have a social media page, it can be a picture where they are just, in their room, they're in front of the house. It's just some regular, picture. And that picture is going to be scanned by millions of eyes, and some of those people are going to be groomers, and they're going to see that picture. They're going to study the picture. They're going to study the background, and things just can spiral from there if they can start that communication exchange. And the groomer is going to tell the child whatever the child wants to hear to validate the child. Where as parents, we tell the child what the child needs to hear. So I don't want to get too much more into that, except saying that is a podcast that you must prioritize. And if it doesn't directly pertain to you, please email that to your friends and say, you know what, I want you to watch this because there's some points in here and maybe some discussion questions you can have with your kids, because I just want you to take that extra step in keeping your kids and your family safe. Jim Mallard, I didn't know of the Mallard podcast up until a few weeks ago. And it is phenomenal, so you uncover these outstanding podcasts and these incredible citizen journalists, the more that you move away from the mainstream media, which I largely have done, and you cultivate the podcast. I actually had to buy another 16 gig SD card. So, I listened to so many podcasts, and a lot of Jim's shows went on that card. But Jim is a paranormal investigator, so you can go to Mallard, MALLIARD.com, Mallard.com, and find out about his work. But he has so many podcasts, and he has interviewed. I was on his show, but Roger Stone, was on his show, and he interviewed the forensic. The detective who was working in forensic linguistics with the FBI, James Fitzgerald. And in that interview, James Fitzgerald was instrumental in helping to crack the Unabomber, the Ted Kaczynski case. And something out of that I'm going to share. So, Jim Fitzgerald was going through Detective Fitzgerald was going through the numerous documents that were provided by Ted Kaczynski's brother, and there was one sentence in it, and the sentence was, "You can't have your cake and eat it too," or I think it might have been transposed as like, "You can't eat your cake and have it too," but it was written in a way that didn't typically follow the way that goes, and it was something that was included in one of the manifestos from the Unabomber. And it was that one sentence which eventually led to obtaining a search warrant, and basically it was weeks later that they were able to locate the Ted Kaczynski and crack this case and basically solve this case and put Ted in jail and stop all the horrors that were associated with the Unabomber. So fascinating stuff, how we think about linguistics and how that fits into the investigative process. So it shows you the range that Jim has. He identifies himself as a paranormal investigator, but then, he has so many interviews of people who look into very specific things like, Jim Fitzgerald and, linguistic forensics, what that meant and how that solved this case. And oh my goodness, and it's the fastest hour in paranormal. It really is. He keeps it to an hour, and he also has a fun set about 2 minutes worth of questions at the end. Like, if there's 3 people dead or alive that you could have for supper, who would it be, and things like that. But a phenomenal citizen journalist, and check it out because there are so many shows that you can go in and instantly create a playlist. So if you're, driving somewhere, if you're out running, whatever you want to do, if you just want to kick back and be educated on a range of topics, and plus the paranormal gets fascinating. He interviewed somebody who identifies as Dark Waters, and this person was talking about even how investigating, interviewing people about paranormal stories of the caution. This Dark Waters was doing this. of not wanting to get too much information if it might be like demonic or something like that, because the spirits can cross through the lines and basically end up tagging themselves to that, to Dark Water, who's doing that interview. So some of you might be like, that's pretty out there. I guess yes and no. I mean, have an open mind, but he is a phenomenal storyteller. He's been on Jim's show. You can find him too. So again, the Mallard Podcast. So I was out running last night. Actually, that's a lie. I was not out running last night. It was the night before. It was phenomenal. The full moon. I mean, it was a full moon. And usually at this time of year, there's a lot of snow on the track, which isn't too far, the high school track from where I live. And that's where I ran. And it was just an incredible night to be reflective. I ran for I was out 90 minutes. I didn't think I was out that long, but 90 minutes. And now we're having snow, pretty big snowfall right now. So we're having some renovations, some updates done on our home. So there's a dumpster in the driveway. And then, of course, our vehicles are parked outside. The garage is turned into like a workshop right now for the workers. So it's going to be kind of weird how I'm going to clear the snow off. So I think I can get out there with my snowblower and at least, the end of the driveway where they come through with the snowplow and, put the nice, 4-foot pile of snow up. I can hammer that down with the snowblower, but the rest I'm going to have to kind of do with a shovel, because especially with the two cars out there, I don't want to get anything too crazy where I'm rubbing up against the car with a snowblower or something like that. But yeah, so it actually looks like tomorrow, there could be a chance of some sledding here, which is incredible because we haven't had enough snow to go sledding yet. We're into February. So, yes. And as you know, I'm not a big fan of winter at all. So snow today, but 6 weeks from now, daylight savings time, and snow's going to probably be gone here. Be getting my bike ready. It's going to be awesome time. So let me go and do a little Post-it note peel off right here. So I was on the Mallory Report, as I had talked about. You can check that out. And Jim and I talked about the Hawaii missile crisis and the blunder of that whole thing of why did it happen? And I argued that really it shouldn't have happened. There are steps in place to prevent something from happening like that in the emergency broadcast system, activated at a local level. If it does have to do with anything that's military related, the only thing that really would happen is just that standard buzz and here's an activation of the emergency broadcast system. The message itself comes out of STRATCOM or NORAD after being confirmed by the president and the Secretary of Defense. But anyway, they ended up firing the guy that pressed the button and to send out this message, saying that there was an inbound missile attack on Hawaii, which there wasn't. But he's saying, you know what? It was like a shift change. I didn't hear that this was a drill. And, I end up they initially reassigned him and he ends up getting fired because of this. So, that doesn't make sense. I mean, apparently I'm thinking he's doing what he needs to do in these situations. And, when they run the drills. So very, very strange on that. I still think this was a hack. I think it was a hack. And I have some other evidence to support that at some of the state levels of some things that have been going on regarding fortifying some computer systems. But I think this was a hack. I think this is all a cover story, and the lack of media coverage we've had. This guy, you would think would be on shows all over the place. Like they would be bringing him, like, tell us what happened. And, how did you, because he was quiet for a while, like he wasn't cooperating. But no, he's not getting any, real attention, from this, which really shows it's not something that's on, the priority list for media. So I think Jim's going to try to contact him and see if he'll come out and talk. And who knows? But Jim and I also talked about the butterfly effect and the Mandela effect. So you might want to look into those.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
And we are back. All right. From my doctoral dissertation, what do we have here? Oh. And actually, this is written pretty well. A lot of times I write things, I'm like, what word is that? So today I'm going to talk about an article that was done by Harvard Business Review. The author is Tasha Eurich, and let me read her bio quick. Tasha. All right. Tasha Eurich has a PhD in organizational. She is an organizational psychologist, researcher, and New York Times bestselling author. She is principal of the Eurich Group, a boutique executive development firm that helps companies from startups to the Fortune 100 succeed by improving the effectiveness of their leaders and teams. Her newest book, Insight, delves into the connection between self-awareness and success in the workplace. So the credit for what I'm going to share to you goes to Tasha, and I'm going to explain it and kind of generalize it out to how I think this can help you. So first of all, and I'll get back to my doctoral dissertation in a second here, but a shout out to the Harvard Business Review. Their articles are incredible. I mean, they're well researched. They stay very close to what their constructs are or what their themes are. And they don't get like the Atlantic, the Atlantic, I've had some issues with the Atlantic early on, but, where they pull from all of these different studies and little quotes and things to kind of build into whatever narrative they're trying to generate. This is very thorough from start to finish. This is extremely well written by Tasha. The research is very sound on this, and you can go in Harvard Business Review and find article after article after article that just meets this high standard. So encourage you to do that. This is the type of stuff where it's so hard with the mainstream media to find articles where you're not being manipulated, trying to be manipulated, or the articles are just so incomplete that you read it and it's like, I'm not quite sure I got the full story, or there was a lot of positionality. Someone wanted me to believe a certain thing here. But Harvard Business Review, check it out, because it and you think Harvard, it's going to be very sophisticated and very much to a niche audience. No, this stuff is done extremely well. And this article is maybe 8 to 10 pages. So check that out, Harvard Business Review. So in my, for my doctoral dissertation, so I had worked with high stakes decision making in the military, healthcare, and then in schools. And from the schools, so talking about, we have 55 million kids a day that go to school in the United States. So large number, a huge number of percentage of our population. Principals, school principals were not reflecting on the decisions that they were making. And so a lot of these too were high stakes decisions. It might have to do with a high stakes discipline event. I'm not necessarily saying like somebody, bringing a knife or a gun or something like that could, but it could be a threat or, a fight, something like that. But anyway, what was happening is you had these high stakes decisions that were happening. Let's say, a student gets in a fight with another student, might, be on a suspension for a few days. And then you might have to look at how are we going to, reunite that student back into the school? Do we have to change classrooms for these students? The ramifications for once the parents are notified and all of that. So it gets into this. So principals often were moved out of what I refer to as a torus. And it is an actual term, Torus, torus, meaning every day, you get up and you basically know what your day is going to be. I mean, you can predict it pretty closely. No days are the same. Sameness doesn't exist. We talked about that, but they're similar. So meaning that today, I can get up and, well, today a little different because it's snowing, but I know, I'm going to, brush my teeth and I'm going to take a shower and here's a cereal I'm going to have, and then I'm going to do this and this. And you can get pretty close into predicting that. And even like on your commute to work and, home and what your job is going to be like that day and things. Now, when you get all the time, so the torus is kind of like a bagel. So you kind of like move around within the torus, not like a straight line. But there can be things that happen to totally throw you out. You get in a car accident or something like that completely takes you out of your torus and moves you into kind of like a state of chaos. And then you have to move from that state of chaos back into a state of torus. So like, let's say car accident, you're transported to the hospital, maybe you have a broken arm, otherwise you're okay. But, you've got to be off of work for a little while. You've got to readjust how you are, able to put your, clothes on and just all these things. And then, work with the insurance company, get a different car, things like that. So at some point, you go very chaotic to when this accident just happens to kind of working throughout chaos back into what your torus is. But your torus, though, resets. It's not the same. I mean, now you've got your arms in a cast, for a number of months and things are different for you. So you get into this new torus, this new routine. And then eventually you kind of go maybe closer back to what your previous torus was, but you'll never completely like go back to what that torus was before the accident, because you're going to always have, some thoughts about the accident, it's going to change. It's going to change the way that you drive. It's going to change some of your behaviors and things like that. So it's very typical, just normal for all of us. Nothing I'm describing here is way out there. But what was happening with principals was it was very hard to do, very difficult to do what I call a hard reset, meaning that you would have, an angry parent, you would, and this would happen all the time. I mean, like daily. It was, the fact that I could even get people to sit down with me for 2 hours to do an interview and then follow-up interview and record it and stuff, where they wouldn't be called out to deal with some kind of situation was incredible, and not always the case. So it's hard for the principals to do this hard reset, basically getting back to the torus. So something happens that moves them outside, and they experience decision fatigue. So you have to make a decision where there's a lot of emotions of the student. The staff are impacted by this. Parents are upset. And basically, you make these decisions and it results in decision fatigue. There was a whole section that developed when I was doing my analyzing. So it's called qualitative. When you're analyzing interviews, it's a qualitative study. And just page after page after page of transcribed interviews. And then you start to find words and patterns that make sense, kind of similar. And it's almost like linguistics, like FBI linguistics, almost. Okay. So you get in and you start to say, here's some themes that are starting to emerge. And one theme that was showing up with every principal was this decision fatigue, basically saying, I make decisions like this, and then I have a hard time rebounding. Like I'm not reflecting on my decisions. I'm having a hard time with introspection. I'm having a hard time breaking away and disconnecting. And what's happening is two things. One is I'm just wearing down. I'm not getting to be as precise of a decision maker as I was. Maybe I'm making faster decisions. I'm patterning decisions, almost like standard operating procedure. Well, this happened, boom, I'm going to do this. And then, because I know I have to move on to the next thing. So you're not as efficient in the heuristics process, or weighing like all of your options. You're kind of going with, well, I'm going to make this decision because this is similar to something that happened in the past, and so you start to pattern your decisions. So, and you move on to the next fire. You can only spend so much time on that, so to speak. So we're going to talk about that, because that would wear down principals. And what principals would also tell me is that had an effect when they would go, maybe the next day they had a professional development meeting, and they're meeting to talk about curriculum or something completely unrelated to this event the previous day, which might have had, significant behavioral incident, whatever. But as they get in and they're talking about curriculum and reading levels and stuff, during that process they're having a hard time making decisions, because they still haven't processed and they haven't returned to their torus. They're still kind of in this state between bouncing between chaos and not maybe like, full chaos is going to be if you have somebody come into school with a weapon and stuff like that. It's going to really kick you out into chaos. But people who are kind of like living on the outside of their torus and not really quite sure, it's hard to get back into what that routine is. So they're just not making good decisions or they're not confident in the decisions they're making. And the question I brought up is like, do you feel you'd make better decisions? Like if you could somehow reset yourself? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. Like I'm kind of walking through some of these things. So I think that's prevalent. So today we're going to draw the distinction between introspection and awareness. We're going to actually talk about these four overarching archetypes of self-awareness. Most people just talk about introspection. Okay, introspection. We need to be more introspective. True, and there's a certain way to do that, which I'm going to talk about today. But really, we need to be aware. Aware is the next step up. That's where you want to get to. It's hard to get to aware. And I'll admit, like, I don't know, maybe in some aspects I'm aware, other aspects I am in introspection. But we're going to talk about kind of these four quadrants. You can identify immediately where you are at. As I go through these, you'll say, yeah, that's me. And there's certain circumstances, certain organizations, it's like, I might be this way at work, but I'm this way at home. But typically, you're going to be pretty standard. If you're an introspective person or a seeker or whatever, that's going to kind of be, a profile that you're going to carry through different aspects of your life. So, and then I get, not to say one is better necessarily than the other, although I do think there is a progression of more opportunities if you can get to awareness. So anyway, we'll go through that. So I also think the term introspection and awareness are conflated. So not because of the Mandela effect, but meaning like those two terms get used as synonyms when they're not. So we will get into that. So, I think I've got a point here I want to share, but in another. So we're going through this article right now, Harvard Business Review, what self-awareness really is and how to cultivate it. Again, by Tasha Eurich, Eurich, January 4th, 2018. So I'm just going to read the start of this, and then I went through and I did notes. Okay. Self-awareness seems to have become the latest management buzzword, and for good reason. Research suggests that when we see ourselves clearly, we are more confident, more creative. We make sounder decisions, build stronger relationships, and communicate more effectively. We're less likely to lie, cheat, and steal. We are better workers who get more promotions. And we are more effective leaders with more satisfied employees and more profitable companies. So that's, wow. If you can deliver all of that, that's pretty amazing. But this article does a nice job of pointing that out. That there is this relationship to those things from the points that Tasha makes. So I'm going to get in now, and I went through, okay, if you're watching this on YouTube, went through, did highlights, made some notes, and I'm going to get into it. So, but the first thing we need to do here is to learn a little bit more about the Safety Doc podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc podcast.
In 10 separate investigations with nearly 5,000 participants. Okay. Tasha and her team examined what self-awareness really is. So right there, 10 separate investigations, 5,000 participants. That's impressive. That's good research because you have different samples you've done, 10 samples, 5,000 participants. That's a good N base over a population base that you're sampling. So right there, that you put that out, that's an indicator. That's good research. That's good research. So about the research included a very thorough lit review of 800 existing scientific studies to understand how previous researchers defined self-awareness and unearthed, themes and trends and so forth. But I like this. 800 existing scientific studies, impressive again, but studies to understand how previous researchers defined, because so many times we just don't define terms. We don't have inter-rater reliability on terms. I talk about that with inclusion is different than mainstreaming. Acceptance is different than tolerance. So nice job. Surveying thousands of people across countries and industries to explore the relationship between self-awareness and several key attitudes and behaviors like job satisfaction, empathy, happiness, and stress. So those are actually called constructs in a survey. So they're trying to understand job satisfaction, empathy, happiness, and stress. Those are 4 constructs, meaning that you then create questions which help inform those constructs or answer questions, so you better understand those constructs, right? So you better understand job satisfaction, empathy, happiness, and stress. And you typically mix those questions up. You don't have, here's our job satisfaction section, here's our empathy. They get mixed throughout the whole survey, which results in more reliability. Now, I'm not a big fan of surveying. So, and I don't know, I've talked about that before. Maybe I'll focus a show just on the reasons why surveys are usually not very, they're not a very good way to get information. Now, in this, I would say, yes, you have constructs that are defined, but think about, it's like, so many times schools will say, well, we're just going to write our own survey to ask teachers what they think about school safety. And principal or whoever puts together some questions in a Google survey doc and boom, sends it out. Well, you haven't identified your constructs, your questions that are going to inform your constructs. So these things you can really design surveys which are going to not tell you a lot of information, or they're just going to validate, what you want to hear. So I'll get into I'll break those down sometime. But anyway, this was well done. We have constructs in this which are identified. So there are 2 types of self-awareness. For example, some see it as the ability to monitor our inner world, whereas others label it as a temporary state of consciousness. So again, two ways. One is it's a way to monitor our inner world, or basically, to think about your thoughts and your values. And this is where you kind of come back to things maybe after a while. Whereas others label it as a temporary state of self-consciousness. And that's really in the moment that you are analyzing all of those things, which is very, again, difficult for, we talked about the school principals to do in the moment. If you can separate away, principals would tell me if I'm out walking my dog at night, I can think about the decision that I made or whatever. But in that moment when I maybe have all of these people around me and other things are going on concurrently, and no, it's hard to get into that state of self-consciousness. So across the studies, we examined 2 broad categories of self-awareness that kept emerging. The first we dubbed internal self-awareness. It represents how clearly we see our own values, passions, and aspirations. So again, internal self-awareness, how you understand your own values, your passions, your aspirations. Okay. And the second category was external self-awareness, meaning understanding how other people view us. So internal, that you understand how you feel, I guess how you align to your own moral compass. And then the second being this external self-awareness of how are other people viewing what I'm doing? Not necessarily that you need positive feedback. That you need the feedback to be positive, people to applaud your decisions and all of that. But are they viewing me as making fair, thoughtful decisions, am I congruent to my values when I'm making decisions, or am I showing favoritism to the, teachers who have worked here longer or something like that, or teachers who are aspiring to become administrators, whatever. It definitely, I want to go back to this external self-awareness because it's the principles, it's people. Now let's get away from principles. It's the people. Just let's take this way. Internal self-awareness, you're out, and you can think you're reading a book, you're sipping tea, you're taking a run, you're doing yoga, you're doing whatever you're doing. You can think your own self-awareness. You're thinking, you're reflecting. How do you feel? Identifying your values. But here's what's happening. This external self-awareness, understanding how other people view us. It's not, I think what's happening is a shaping is going on. And it's for leaders too. It's the leaders who are checking out, like how popular am I basically, and what's the media saying about me, as a leader and all of this stuff. I think it's crazy, but I think it happens. So it's not so much external self-awareness as in whether or not people see you as being just or whatever. I think it's when people, are they seen as a rock star? Are they seen as someone who's being criticized? And I think there are people who rise above that. And that's great. But I know, there's a number of professional athletes, for example, who they seek external validation by reading what was written on ESPN or their local papers or whatever, about them and their performance and things like that. And some athletes will totally tune out of that because they'll be like this. It's so destructive. It can lead them one way or another. It can lead them to be very complacent. You're the infallible star and everything you do is awesome. And it wasn't you, it was the refs or the conditions or bad coaching or something. So anyway, let's get into the four self-awareness archetypes. And there's a diagram that goes with this. It will be in the blog post. So the first one I'm going to talk about is low internal self-awareness. Those people are seekers. Okay, seekers. So that's the first group, seekers. They don't know. They don't yet know who they are, what they stand for, or how their team see them. As a result, they might feel stuck or frustrated with their performance and relationships. Probably see that in people who are kind of new into positions. They don't quite understand how they fit their role, how their role fits into different parts of the organization, into the greater organization, into their career aspirations and all of that. So they're trying to figure that out. Seekers. They don't know yet who they are, what they stand for. So those people can benefit greatly from mentoring. And those people are very susceptible to being heavily externally reinforced and shaped. So if you have somebody who's a seeker and they're not sure what they stand for, somebody in a position of positionality, like a person who's been in a management position for a long time or whatever, or, I guess Hector and I can even talk about how this might work in the grooming process. But you can, if somebody is validating you, not necessarily as telling you what's appropriate to hear, but telling you that, you're doing great and all of that, that is, that fosters that seeker behavior. You don't want to stay in the seeker category long. Okay. But everybody maybe, we kind of get there at some point, seekers. And the first thing you're going to do as a seeker is say well, here internally, here's what I stand for, here's what I believe in, whatever. And that will start to move you into other categories. So let's talk about another category here, pleasers. Okay. And once you move into pleasers, these are people who are also low internal self-awareness, but they really have high external self-awareness. So pleasers, they can be focused on appearing a certain way to others, that they could be they overlook a lot of things, and over time they tend to make choices that aren't in service of their own success and fulfillment. Example that I've seen with pleasers, these are the people that don't want to upset the boss. So it's like the people who are in management, and they want to make sure that they're not telling the boss anything that the boss doesn't want to hear. It's like the emperor has no clothes. You don't say anything like that because you don't want to say anything that isn't going to be congruent with decisions that your boss is making. Even if the decisions aren't in the best interest, maybe of the boss or the company, you're not going to say anything. So pleasers are very much prevalent in micromanaged companies. And in school boards, for example, when school boards, need you to validate, they get in and micromanage and say, why did you spend $8.11, for this? And you went to this conference and whatever, versus like just the professional discretion to do that. You need to a lot of people morph into this pleaser role of feeling they need to please the board to keep these people happy and things like that. Versus, being true to themselves and doing what they need to do. So pleasers. Now let's move up into the area. So if you're a seeker or a pleaser, let's move you into introspector or being aware. So high internal self-awareness and low external self-awareness. So this is introspector. So I've told people, try to be more introspective as I've worked in consulting, and that, take time to understand your decision-making, how it worked with your values, the options that were available, how it applied to the rules set, and just, how you feel about that. And a part that comes into that I've talked about before is member checks. Member checks are people that do the same type of job you do, or similar type of job or management. They've been it can be cross field, but they can relate. Okay. And you can talk to them, you can't give out confidential information, but you can talk to them and they'll be true with you. And they'll say, yeah, like this was probably good. This probably wasn't. Here's some areas you looked at really thoroughly. Here's some areas you kind of glossed over. These are the people who help you find the blind spots because you're not finding those on yourself. So introspectors here, they're clear on who they are, but don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots by getting feedback from others. This can harm their relationships and limit their success. So an introspector could be someone who is extremely efficient at what they do, and they can just keep accelerating, but they're not realizing, for example, this could be someone who gets great at their job and they're doing all of these awesome rock star things, but at the same time, their blood pressure is sky high and they're working all these long hours and they're not going to their, things that they used to like to do, like, go to movies or go out biking or do things with their family. So these holes are happening. These blind spots are happening I'm doing allegedly like great here, but at the same time, I'm losing it because my body's not healthy and I'm at high risk for heart attack, stuff like that. So these are introspectors. So, I for years told people search to be better at introspection, which I think comes with the caveat of you need a member check group to be able to be honest with you. It was fascinating. It was back in the, oh my goodness. And I wrote about this somewhere and I don't know where it is. But I'm, oh goodness. Did I write it down? All right. I don't, but I've got it. I'll get into it in a second. I've got a great story to share off that, but anyway, introspectors and member checks. And then we get into what I think is ideal. It's high external self-awareness included with high internal self-awareness. So this kind of gets into the research of Carl Weick and sense making. Aware. They know who they are, what they want to accomplish and seek out, and value others' opinions. This is where leaders begin to fully realize the true benefits of self-awareness. So awareness it brings in that missing piece where you're performing very well, but you're also listening and perceptive of what others are saying. You're being able to evaluate that and calibrate yourself versus like get in that defensive mode of like, you said this, but I did this because of whatever. It's like, no, I mean, and some of the things you hear, yeah, it's going to be legit. Some people might just be jealous and not give you, the information that's pure. But anyway, it's that awareness. It's understanding that how your internal awareness, how you're feeling, it's that external awareness, being able to assess that and say, you know what, like, I really, my doctor is sitting there and telling me about whatever. my health, and it's not dismissing it and saying, yeah, whatever, like other people, that's not me. It's saying, no, I know, you're right. I need to make sure I'm getting out at lunch hour and I'm, walking around a couple blocks, and I'm setting some boundaries on days that I'm getting out at times. I'm making sure like I'm doing some things with my, my family, and hey, I really used to like, doing more stuff out in the yard. I need to get back into that. I want to go spend some time at the library, or there was something I was doing with this community group, which I haven't done much anymore because of meetings and stuff. So I want to reconnect with that. So yeah, searching for awareness. And again, I'll put the graphic out there. It does a really nice job. And again, I'll link to the article. All of that will be there. So, kind of gets into the theme of the story. Don't stop at introspection. Introspection will only get you so far. Awareness will take you that extra step. So, experience and power hinder self-awareness. So yeah, I definitely think, I think that's true. Experience and power hinder self-awareness. If you have the power, people aren't going to challenge you necessarily. The people that you work with, they're just not going to you're going to have a false sense of confidence that everything is working because you've made it work. Well, you're part of a whole organization. There's people underneath you who are working. Some of it could just be the luck of the field that you're in at that moment, that things are going well. So yeah, you get in that comfort zone, and I don't think you sharpen the saw, as Covey would say. You don't sharpen the saw. So, anyway, here's a quote from the study. Even though most people believe they are self-aware, only 10 to 15% of the people we studied actually fit the criteria. Most were kind of in that introspection. So if you can get to that self-aware or that awareness level of knowing internally, your internal awareness and your external awareness, you're really in a great place, and that's where you want to be. So similarly, the more power a leader holds, the more likely they were to overestimate their skills and abilities, So, yeah, it's one of those things where you just think you get better than the systems, and all of that kind of depends on you. And, it's, so researchers have proposed two primary explanations for this phenomena. First, by virtue of their level, senior leaders simply have fewer people above them who can provide candid feedback. So I talked about those member checks. Yeah, there are fewer member checks. Fewer people who have walked in those shoes can really give them feedback, candid feedback. The second part is the more power a leader wields, the less comfortable people will be to give them constructive feedback. So yeah, because you don't want to upset the boss, right? and even though the boss might say, like, I want you to give honest feedback, people are going to measure that. So that's where you really need those member checks to come in. So as a person's power grows, their willingness to listen also shrinks. So, I don't know. I question that. I question that statement. Here's why. I think that's dependent upon kind of your fiscal situation and where you are in your career. And here's why. Okay, here's why. I worked with school principals who, once they got to age 55, which is retirement age in my state, that you can retire and start drawing your pension. Principals would tell me that once they got to age 55, they felt much more empowered to make kind of bold decisions, to go out on a limb, to enter into areas which might have a little more controversy versus playing it safe. And basically they felt they were the best leaders that they were once they hit age 55. Because the reasons they gave, like if you're age 40, 45, you've got a family, you're setting down, roots and stuff. If you upset your teachers, you get a vote of non-confidence, upset parents, school board, stuff like that, you might have to move, and that's hard on your family. It's hard on you and your career. And so it's like, people would play it more safe, kind of a vanilla approach and do some things, but pull off of other things. So this is where I'm not sure, as one power grows, I think there's an inverse relationship to that. That, if someone is, totally fiscally secure, as a CEO, and if they lose, the position, the board of directors votes them out or whatever, they're going to land on their feet. And of course, fiscally, it's not as much as an issue versus like ego. But so, we talked about member checks, and here's where I wrote down member checks. So, it was back between 1915 and 1924. And I think this is fascinating. I absolutely think this is fascinating. So it was Harvey Firestone, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs. Now, I know all of those except John Burroughs, so I had to look up John Burroughs. And John Burroughs is a naturalist. So, with nature, kind of in that John Muir type thing. So again, Harvey Firestone, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and John Burroughs. They call themselves the Four Vagabonds. And here's what they did. They were member checks, okay? They knew they were all leaders in their field. And when you got to Firestone, Ford, and Edison, I mean, they experimented. They had failed. They had grown, as moguls in their fields. But who could you talk to that's going to understand what it's like to be Henry Ford unless you're talking to like a Harvey Firestone or like a Thomas Edison? I mean, these are people that can relate. And you also have the same curiosities and interests and stuff like that. And of course, John Burroughs then kind of being like the expert in naturalist and helping them understand and relate to nature. So they would go out, they put these caravans together. And initially, they'd go on camping trips and basically kind of rough it, although they weren't roughing it at all. They had a caravan, maybe of like 15 vehicles to start out, and they bring all the amenities with them, but they would set up like a camp. And then they would have their support people maybe like a block away in the woods, but you didn't know they were there. And, bringing them all of their meals and all this stuff. These four guys would sit around a campfire and they would just talk. They would just, and the comfort, sit back in the chairs and talk and shoot the bowl, I guess, and they did this very frequently, this camaraderie. And that was the member check, though. That was their member check opportunities going on. I did more research into that. So absolutely fascinating. What happened, though, they connected with nature, but they didn't fully connect with nature because they brought, again, all these amenities with them. And pretty soon the caravan went from like 15 vehicles up to like 50. It was like the circus coming to town. People would see this. They would come through and then pretty soon people would go up and try to find where they were camping, and they would bug them. And basically it stopped because of that. It just got too big and too public. But that is a perfect example of member checks. And if you want to read more about that, you can see photos, but that's member checks. Again, sitting around, that campfire, maybe going out, doing some boating, canoeing type stuff on a lake, hiking through some woods and stuff like that. But these are where you need to have those member checks. And how many people do that? Like how many people today do that? Like, I'll admit, I haven't been involved in a member check kind of activity for a while. I mean, maybe, I don't know, half a year. And that's something I need to get back into. I do have, a couple of friends, that I'll be meeting up with as soon as it gets warm enough to get out and golf. And we're going to be, that'll definitely be a member check. And some other, friends, of course, I'll be visiting and stuff like that. So yeah, have those. But it's very important to have those in your life, have those. And these are people, again, who can understand what you're doing, kind of what you've been through, some of the pressures that you might be under. And these aren't people, though, that you're going to validate you. You're not seeking them out to high five you and validate you, and that you just give them all of your issues and problems and all of that. It's where here's the thing here. Introspection doesn't always improve self-awareness. This introspection mode, we want to get to awareness. So, okay. As it turns out, the question why is surprisingly ineffective a self-awareness question. Research has shown that we simply do not have access to many of the unconscious thoughts, feelings, and motives we are searching for. So we talk about why. Although the word why appeared. So in this research that this research team was doing a study, the word why appeared fewer than 150 times. the word what appeared more than 1,000 times. So you're examining the process. Okay. So that's this whole what part thing. Nobody wants to hang around you as a member check if you're always like, why did this happen to me? And why, because it's kind of like this victimization type, thought of, like I have no control over, or whatever, this. And sometimes you just don't, like, why did I get such a bad rating from my employees? We brought somebody in to talk to them of, what they think about me and about management, and why is this so bad, and why, whatever. That doesn't get you anywhere. But what you need to do is you need to ask the what, and the what really helps you out more. So, like, what are the situations here that are making me feel unhappy with the way that my employees are, have scored out this assessment about me or whatever, and what's in common here. So this whole thing of what, it's like, then it brings you back to your own values. And it's like, I want my employees to view me as someone who's competent, that's someone that they can come to. And so maybe like, I'm not listening to what they're saying either. Maybe we're not very well aligned as a company and what our mission statement is here. So it's not, so I think when you ask that what, it gets into the process part of it. Like Jack Welch was great with GE, right? From, 1981 to 2001, ran GE as the CEO, and would get right on the floor, the manufacturing floor, and would talk to people, of tell me what you're doing like right now, and how does this work with somebody else who's doing this, and just this conversational thing, and show me how this is done, and tell me about your training, and what are some things you think just right now like would be better about your job, or what's really good about what's happening down here, and just, these types of things, like you could walk through and you could do that. So it's the what, it's asking what, and what is process. We've talked about this before on the Safety Doc Show. Improve process and your outcomes will typically improve. So you don't study like, why did this go wrong? You look at the process. What is the process for this? And by studying the process, saying, oh, you know what? We have more options available, like at this part, these different nodes in the process. And we didn't spend enough time maybe considering the options that we had available, or like I think we should have more options available along the process. So what are the options that we can bring into this, so we're making better decisions instead of getting very much into like standard operating procedure. That helps though. And it makes it more of a systems issue that you're trying to improve. If you get into why gets very singular. Why is very convergent onto like this one flaw in you or this person or whatever. So, I don't know. Stop asking why. Stop getting hung up into this whole why thing, because you're only going to learn if you ask the what. Why did the Challenger explode? And then, well, you found out through the what, the processes and the pressure to launch on it and not delay and all of these things, and organizational and feedback. That was the what that really got into it. The why is very technical. The why, a seal, failed and boom, this is what happened. So, you can get very, very technical into that. But again, it is understand the why will get you your direct cause. Okay. The why is a hospital where a doctor makes a mistake during a surgery. Okay. Why? Why? We don't understand, why? How are you going to find that? So that's a direct cause, made a error in the surgery. Now the what is, so that's the what is trying to get at the root cause. What's going on? What's going on here? Well, okay. The doctor had to work 2 extra shifts, and also was given, like a unfamiliar surgical team to work with. So hadn't had the team that typically he or she works with for these procedures. So, and we found out the what is there's this pattern right now of we're short on doctors. So we're asking doctors to take more shifts. And also when we have acute situations where we have to call in doctors, we're calling We're not reaching out to other hospitals, other physicians to come in. So we're basically, our doctor was tired. We have a system here that is not designed to look out for that best interest of that physician. So we placed a fatigued decision, and we know fatigue impacts decision making, even in the most highly trained, highly skilled people. So that's your root cause. Your root cause is you have the systems problem that you need to fix, meaning that you're not burning out your physicians with not a lack of sleep. So this is what happened. So anyway, this whole systems things. So examine process. So as we move on here, okay. In one study, psychologist J. Gregory Hickson and William Schwann gave a group of undergraduates negative feedback on their test of their sociability, likability, and interestingness. Okay. And then they saw how they react. Thinking about why one is the way one is may be no better than not thinking about oneself at all. So people would get this back, and especially the ones where the feedback was negative. Again, this is all a pretend type of thing. It meant nothing. It was related to nothing. But people like just spending that time of why, versus like if you don't even think about it, like your outcome there is by pounding your mind and your thoughts of why, you're not getting any further of like if you just don't even take that on at all. So again, why isn't the question to ask? So I'm going to put, a plug out there for, I like Marcus Buckingham's work, so you can check him out. I think, on YouTube, Trombone Player won it, but he talks about playing to your strengths too, which I think is very important throughout all of this. In reality, feedback accentuates the negative. In reality, it does. I mean, if you ask for feedback, most of the feedback you get is probably going to be negative. Now, your member checks will be honest with you. Okay. Your member checks will be honest. But if you're just asking for feedback, a lot of times feedback is negative because people are negative and, cynical. And this amazed, I'll go into this. I'll validate this in chat forums. Like we'll go into comment sections and talk about comments. And that, if you follow the show, because I think comments kind of reveal what the public really thinks about things. I mean, the people that are, if you have, enough comments, you can kind of distill out some themes. And not that everyone comes in at negative and whatever, and maybe it's more of a trend. If you align with this, there isn't a need to go in and further champion it through comments, but just some crazy patterns that show up in these comment threads. But anyway, playing to the strengths. Marcus Buckingham, playing to your strengths, knowing what your strength areas are, keeping those going. Because we hear this thing, think of like a baseball team, like that's a great third baseman, but not everybody, or softball team or whatever. But you're not going to be an expert at every position. You're not going to be an expert pitcher or first, playing first base or the outfield or catcher. So you're an expert at what you're an expert at. You have some strengths, strength areas. We all do. We have strength areas, and we have areas that aren't as strong, which is fine. It's normal. That's completely normal. I think I talked about this too. I had a basketball player when I was coaching. His name was Rob, and Rob was awesome. He was like the best in the league. And we went up to the bowling alley as a team after the season was done, just to hang out and kind of have a, season-ending event. And Rob was a horrible bowler. And I remember the look on his teammates' faces, like, oh my goodness, like, you're a great basketball player. How can you be so awful at bowling? And I think, Rob was kind of like, I'm not great at everything, What was it? Like Michael Jordan played basketball, then he went out and he played baseball, for a while, and it wasn't nearly as good as baseball. I mean, they kept him on teams because fans would flock to this ballparks to see him. But it's this thing where you have these expectations sometimes that are placed upon people and could be placed upon you as a leader, of saying, like if you're really great in this area, like we expect you then to have that same greatness, that skill set carry over into these 10 other areas. So know that of yourself and know that right away. Like one thing for me is on podcasting, like I know like the graphics type of stuff I'm not great at. So I know the people to go to and friends that can do that and know the work that I do. So then they can create the stuff that matches what I have. So I know where my skill sets are and kind of where they're not. So, at the very end of this, anyway, Tasha goes on to talk about something referred to as reflected best self exercise, or RBS. Just to put that out there, that kind of gets more into looking at the process of how you do things. Reflected best self RBS exercise, something you can get in Google.